Hi, my name is Michael Smook. Today is May 6th. We're in the year 2018, and it's a Sunday. And I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York. Today it's episode 24, and the overall topics is civics. And the topic of today's conversation is entitled New Questions, Next Steps. What we're going to be talking about is Trump economics, and we'll be talking about what the president has been doing thus far and what he could do to have a more effective administration. So the outline of today's talk is Chapter 2 is entitled A Conversation at Our Club. Chapter 3 is entitled What Are Our Goals? Chapter 4 is entitled What Are the Plans? Chapter 5 is the same title as the overall talk today. The overall talk today is New Questions, Next Steps. And we'll talk about the three pillars of Trump economics, and we'll conclude. I'll give you some special thoughts, tying it all together. Now that we've outlined what today's talk is about, let's move forward together. We've completed Chapter 1. Let's move on to Chapter 2. Chapter 2, A Conversation at Our Club. My wife and I belong to a pool and tennis club. We go there, we swim, we really like the barbecue, and it gives us a time to relax and catch up with reading, and we go there from Memorial Day through Labor Day. From time to time, we have different friends visit us at the club. What I'm thinking about is a conversation I had with friends in mid to late July 2017. These friends are Trump voters, Donald Trump voters, and enthusiastic Trump supporters. They want to do engagement and conversation. They're aware that I do shoot YouTube talks, and some of them relate to politics. I rarely initiate conversations with friends, regardless of their political affiliations, and talk about politics. But what I endeavor with any friends, whether they're Republicans, Democrats, or somewhere different, I endeavor in every conversation I have with people to be civil, and the conversation should be informational. They should be insightful, meaningful, and fun. And so the thing about it is, if what my friends are talking about, when I'm talking about, we differ, as a rule, it's not important that I'm right. It's important that we exchange opinions. If I want to come be strong about something, I'll write an essay and post it on Google, or we'll shoot a talk like we're doing today. And so this day, my friends approached me, my Trump voting and supporting friends. What they did was, we're kicking around some ideas, and after a while we came to an agreement how the Trump administration could be successful. They're asking me, how can Trump be more successful? So what we did is we were exchanging ideas, and we both agreed that the phrase "art of the deal," which you could fit on a bumper sticker, the president would be successful if he channeled art of the deal and leveraged it into policies which emphasize his strengths. And then we discussed back and forth what is the ultimate deal. And the ultimate deal is improve trade relations with China and enhance nuclear security on the Korean Peninsula. And then I added, at the end of the conversation, I said, if the president walks back and re-embraces the Trans-Pacific Partnership with the United States, with our old trading partners, Japan, our new trading partners, Vietnam, and a country that should be involved in the agreement, South Korea, if we walk back and re-embrace this agreement, we'll have more leverage in conversations with the Chinese and trade negotiations. And also, since China is a close ally of North Korea, it will enhance the United States' ability to ensure greater peace on the Korean Peninsula. I can't say whether my friends agreed with me because that was the last thing I said. And then after that, these conversations are not long. And then after that, my wife joined the conversation. We spoke about anything but current events and politics. We had a nice time with our friends, and then we went out for dinner. And we always have a good time with our friends, with these friends and with other friends. And so those are that was an important conversation that's memorable that I had in 2017. So now that we've completed chapter 2, we're going to go into chapter 3. And in chapters 2, 3, and 4, they're important because it builds kind of what I call a baseline, which will allow us to then move on to chapter 5 and build on what I think Trump economics is and what I think the president should do. Let me be clear about something right now. My goal of this talk is simply not to verbally beat up on the president. Actually, I want to help him. Even though I'm a Democrat and I voted for Hillary Clinton, I'm not a big fan of his. I'm not a particular fan of the way he carries himself, but I'm a patriotic American and I want to see good things happen to the United States. And I endeavor to be inclusive and cross the ideological divide in my thinking and in my talks. So now let's go to chapter 3. What are our goals? What are our goals? If you understand what your goals are, you could tie that into politics, policies, programs, and ultimately that aligns with governing, the business of running a government. And that's what public administration is about, and that's what the federal government does. So what are our goals? We're going to start at the individual and nuclear family level. Any politician who wishes to get reelected, whether it's an executive or legislative position at the federal, state, or local level, what they address to their constituents, potential voters, is what can we do to enhance prosperity and ensure a good life now and for our children and our children's children over the next couple of generations. And I'm a student of history, and I think about it seems important to me what happened 100 years ago and what's going to happen 100 years from now. And I think that right now we have within our power to turn things around, to build on what's already been accomplished in this country, and have a prosperous the United States, and maintain the United States as the world's #1 superpower. The tools are within our hands. We need to make some adjustments, and then we could build on what we've already done. Now, the second goal, it's kind of a compound goal like the first one, is the last election. It was a big surprise to me that Donald Trump won. And this is what I think happened. I think that in 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, Hillary Clinton won the election. She lost the election. Donald Trump won the election by in those 3 states, and he won those states, which made a difference in the Electoral College. What he did was he won those 3 states, and that made a difference in the election. And what I think happened in those 3 states is there were enough middle-class people. Many of them were Barack Obama voters in 2008 and 12. And Donald Trump ran as the change candidate, and he highlighted his business acumen in real estate and in other areas. And he said he could use these tools that he had to more effectively run the federal government. And I think that was the difference in the election. And the reason why he had an audience that was willing to listen to him was the fact that this is my interpretation. Other people have come close, but this is mine. I think that there are a lot of middle class people, 2 heads of household, 1 heads of household, black, white, red, yellow, brown. They decided to vote for Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton. And the reason they did that was they don't feel so middle class anymore. And they're living paycheck to paycheck, and it's impossible to pay the mortgage, or in some cases to pay the rent. And the 1 or 2 heads of household, they have 1 job. Sometimes they're juggling 2 or 3 jobs, and it's a struggle. And sometimes for some people, it's nearly impossible to save for retirement or save for your kids' college. So that's what I got out of the last election, and that's why Donald Trump won a narrow victory, and those three states made all the difference in the Electoral College. And also, I'm a Democrat, and I believe in expanding the middle class. I believe in social justice to help those folks who are low income and who, over 9 years of prosperity between Obama and Trump, have not elevated themselves from being low income to middle class. Most low income people have a job. Many have they have food stamps, and they to feed their families, and they have Medicaid as insurance, but it's a real struggle, and they have not elevated themselves from low income to middle class. So I believe that it's necessary for people, inclusive of their race or ethnicity, and regardless of whether they're a Republican, Democrat, conservative, progressive, independent, non-affiliated, I think we need to reach out to as many people as possible and try to help transition them to middle class status. And there are things government can do through job training and rebuilding the country through infrastructure rebuilding to hire people, and human infrastructure, scholarships for trade schools, 2 and 4 year public colleges, studying STEMs disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math. I think all of that could help elevate low-income people and or their kids to middle class status. So that summarizes the most important points of Chapter 3. Are we need to strengthen the middle class, and we need to expand it and reach out to low-income people. It's a national security issue, and it will help enforce the fact that the United States can be a superpower 20, 40, 100 years from now. And this is what I think we need to do. And that's why we needed to talk about Chapter 3 before moving on to Chapter 4 and 5 and talk about Trump economics, because it resonates inside me and it's all connected. So now that we've summarized what are our goals, let's talk about what are our plans. Previous talks I spoke about U.S. planning and managing its relations with China. And China is a rising power, and it aspires to be the world's #1 economy. And the goal of the United States being #1 and #2 is not as important as that we have enlightened policies and a vigorous economy, and we're focused and we're engaged in the world, because the world is counting on us in many ways. So in terms of, we're going to cover some ground we did previously and some new ground today in Chapter 4, and then we'll go on to Chapter 5. In terms of the plans, what China is doing is they're doing 4 things to ensure, under one plan, to re-engineer its industry and its economy is an endeavor called China 2025. China is big time investing in computerization, digitalization for manufacturing and service industries. And what they're doing is they're looking into and spending trillions of dollars on data analytics, cloud computing, supercomputers, autonomous driving, electronic vehicles, and so many other cutting areas of information technology. Secondly, they're looking to buy businesses from other countries and integrate them into the Chinese plan. Third, what they're doing is, I've read about this, and I believe that there is merit to some of what I've been reading, is that the Chinese are engaged in widespread cyber theft, and they're cracking into databases and computers of contractors who are contracted by the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force, and they're stealing designs for jets and for bombers, and then they're building their jets and bombers that are remarkably like our plans. So Homeland Security is something we need to enhance. And also what the Chinese are doing is, to protect their industries, they have tariffs which are greater than the United States. China could more easily import goods to the United States because the tariffs are low in the United States. In China, they're much higher. The last thing China is doing is they're enticing the U.S., Canada, Europe, and Asian economic powers like Japan to build factories in China. And what they're doing in China is they're building factories, but the Chinese insist that the West, when they build factories, they partner with a Chinese company and they split the profits with the Chinese company. And in addition, what they're insisting on and what the West is doing is they're sharing their patent protection with the new Chinese partners. So what the Western companies that are building plants in China, what they're doing is they're giving up their most valuable secrets to the Chinese, which adds to their master plan of China 2025. These are all things that could be negotiated. And we're going to talk about multilateral free trade agreements and leading to better negotiations with China. And these are things that could be negotiated. And these are things in a very quiet way, in a room, no Twitter accounts, no internet, no bombast. We could quietly speak to them. And I think we could persuade them to come around to our way of thinking. It won't be easy. It could be months or years, but I think that's going to happen. The other thing that China is doing is they're looking to greatly enhance their influence throughout the world, especially with developing nations. They're providing aid to countries in Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America. These are not grants. This is not coming out of the goodness and kindness of the hearts of the Chinese government, the Communist Party, businesses, and all the rest. These are business arrangements. What China is doing is they're reaching out to countries with bad credit ratings that have desperate needs. Some of them are poor countries, and they're making them an offer they can't refuse. What China is doing is China is reaching out to nations such as Ecuador. Ecuador is in South America. 16 million people. It faces the Pacific Ocean. It's a poor nation. What China is doing is they're coming in with their own companies. They're building roads, bridges, hospitals. They're extending the electrical grid. They're allowing for fresh, cool, clean drinking water to be used nationwide for agriculture and in individual homes, and parallel systems that process waste treatment systems, removing toxicity from raw sewage and germs, 90% or more germs. So when the result of these processes is reunited with the environment, it's not an ecological and public health disaster. So what's happening is Ecuador. They do not have a lot of cash to pay the Chinese in terms of dollars, gold, silver, but they have a different form of liquid assets. What Ecuador is doing to pay for all this is $11 billion or more of aid, is what they're doing is they have a different form of liquid assets. 90% of oil in Ecuador is shipped, extracted from the ground, and it's shipped to China. And 10% stays in Ecuador to power the country. So what China is doing is, and this ties into the One Belt, One Road. What they're doing is they're going green in a big way with renewable sources of energy in terms of solar and wind. But at the same, and they've signed the Paris Climate Accord, so they want to meet goals that they've set for themselves. But also what China is doing, you have to understand there are 1.4 billion people in China, and it's an expanding middle class that has great expectations they're going to live a better life, like people do in the United States. They want to live better. And so China needs to feed, clothe, provide heat to its people, energy to its people. So so China is reaching out to developing nations for coal, natural gas, and oil, and Ecuador, which is plentiful with oil, is extracting it and shipping it to China. And I can't say how long it's going to take for Ecuador to pay off its bills to China, but Mexico, Central America, South America, including Ecuador, The United States for over 200 years has considered it part of its own backyard. Latin Americans might not consider that, but the United States does. And as a superpower, it's a concern of mine, and I think it should be a concern to people in power within the United States. And so basically, what I've done is I've outlined what China is doing to leap ahead as the world's #1 economy and to vault ahead of the United States as the world's most influential country. The United States, we still have a lot going for us, but we need to pay attention to that. As far as what the United States can do, and I'm going to be briefer about talking about what we could do, what the United States needs to do is we need to walk back, re-embrace free trade agreements, the one in Asia with Japan, our old trading partners, Vietnam, our new trading partner, and we should also add South Korea to this treaty. And I think in this way, we could very softly, quietly speak to the Chinese. It could take months, it could take years, but I think we'll get their attention. And I think we'll see more compromises because we're leading with allies who are our trading partners and who like the idea that the United States, in what Obama called the pivot to Asia, we're not only a military presence, we're an economic presence, and our trade partners realize the United States has their back and they have our back, and this way we'll have better relations with China. And also, there's been a lot of upset people in places like Indiana when Carrier Air Conditioner goes across the border to Mexico. And what we need to do is, I think, what would ease the pain and the anger of the American people with multilateral free trade agreements, which has a bad reputation in this country. What the United States needs to do is, we have the American Society of Civil Engineers says that what we have is $4.6 trillion worth of rebuilding we must do. So we have a lot of work to do. And we need to focus on rebuilding the country, and this way we'll be less focused on whether Carrier Air Conditioner stays or not stays. Of course we want Carrier Air Conditioner to stay. Of course we want to keep them, businesses like Carrier and other businesses in the United States. What we need to do is, I think it'll take the sting out of that, and if we realize we're putting people to work and where America works, then I think we're going to be in a better place. And so that's very briefly covering what are the plans, what the Chinese are doing, and briefly what we should be doing. And I spoke about that, most of what we just, Chapter 4, I spoke about that in October 2017. Now, since we're a year and 4 months into the Trump administration, I'm going to speak about Trump economics. And before I speak specifically about what I call the 3 pillars of Trump economics, and I want to make some things clear to my audience, and in the remote chance the president's watching this talk, I want him to understand this as well. I am in no way trying to beat up on the president. I'm trying to help him. And I think the president won the presidency. He ran in the primaries and the general election as a hard right Republican, but he was atypical. He said things that no politician has ever said before, and it worked. But I think to run the government, to run the country, you need to run your administration much different than you run a campaign. The campaign had a lot to do with politics and wedge issues, and I really think instead of politics, I think what the president needs to do and his Republican Congress, they need to think more about public administration. Public administration is a very matter of fact. It thinks in terms of utilitarian concepts, the greatest good for the greatest number, and it also is involved in cost-benefit analyses. So, in a nutshell, what that means is, how do we get things done? And as a Democrat who thinks about himself in fiscal conservative terms and a centrist, and I'm looking to reach out to as many people as possible, I'm thinking, what can we do? And I'm suggesting the president run it, do an about face and run his politics and his administration, public administration, from the political center. I don't think what he's doing is working. I granted the economy is going well. Inflation is below 2%. Unemployment is 3.9%. At the end of the year, when you total up total economic output of the country, it'll be $20 trillion. So in many ways, the economy is doing very well. But he has high unpopularity ratings for different reasons. And I think that what I'm going to say is I'm going to go through the three pillars of Trump economics, and I'm going to say a lot of things where we do not align together, the president and I. But I think if some of my ideas, if he listens to them and he starts to govern from the center, I think he'll achieve a lot more, and he'll be more popular. And I think it's highly possible he could win re-election and win big. So this is what we're going to talk about. The first pillar of Trump economics, it really isn't policies that have been formally been introduced by Congress, and there are more things that are unknown. But still, I want to talk about it. The Trump plan to rebuild the country, the infrastructure rebuilding plan, is a 10-year plan. It's $1.7 trillion. The federal government has only agreed in this outline to contribute $200 billion. $200 billion is 10 to 15% of the plan. And states and local governments have been invited to participate, as have private businesses. And my problem is this looks and feels and smells like a privatization plan, which aligns with Republican interests. And I'm up to public-private partnerships, but not a complete privatization plan. What the country dearly, truly, and deeply needs is we need infrastructure that is not very profitable, but is needed by a wide range of people, whether they're low-income, middle class, or wealthy. Everybody needs clear, clean, fresh drinking water, and we need waste management systems that will take the toxicity out of sewage and eliminate 90% or more of the germs before this material is rejoined with the environment, so we don't have an environmental nightmare nor a public health catastrophe. So these are the kind of things that the private sector is not capable of carrying out. The federal government, let me make this clear, the federal government's $200 billion of a $1.5 trillion 10-year plan is clearly insufficient. The Congress, the president, need to have specific ideas. I'm not sure what this plan is about yet. They need to have specific ideas what needs to be done, and the federal agencies that carry out the president's plan once Congress authorizes and appropriates funds, they need to have a seat at the table. They need to give directions, and they need to show leadership, but there also needs to be degree of collaboration and cooperation with state, local businesses. In terms of private sectors, businesses, one way to do it is competitive sealed bids. You want to get the cost-effective ways of rebuilding the country, and on rare occasions it could be sole source contracts if it's found that only one contractor could do a specific job. So this is where I see Trump economics going in terms of infrastructure rebuilding. Also, I go to work every day on the subway, and we're building a new subway line, the Second Avenue subway. It costs 2 to 3 times as much as what they're doing in France and in Germany. The subway system has joint responsibilities of Governor Cuomo and Mayor de Blasio, and it's run by a Republican public administrator, Joe LaHota. And I think what we need to do is we need to we need to build the Second Avenue subway line, and we need to borrow, we need to study and quite possibly borrow from what they're doing in France and in Germany. These are post-industrialized nations. They're very advanced, very sophisticated, but it costs 2 or 3 times as much to build the Second Avenue subway line in New York City. And also, we need to study what they're doing in places like Hong Kong. It's a city-state. It doesn't need money from central government, the People's Republic of China. It runs its own affairs through local taxes and through contributions from real estate interests. And the real estate sector is involved in building, renovating, and operations of the subway. And this is my interpretation. They have an important role, but compared to the transit authority in Hong Kong, a city-state, they're a junior partner, an important junior partner that has lots of leverage. But every year in Hong Kong, they don't have deficits in their subway system. They have surpluses. And it does apply to the United States, and especially New York. And the reason why it applies is they have 5 million riders a day. The city of New York has 5.7 million riders a day. It's not a complete match, but it's close enough match. And the reason why we're having this conversation about the city of New York, the state of New York, is I believe the president likes to back winners. And I think that if we make some adjustments by studying what they do in Europe with the French and the Germans, what they're doing in Hong Kong, and we see that the Second Avenue subway, the remainder of it is built on time and under budget, and we way well under budget. And also the president sees that public-private partnerships, the Democrat mayor and governor are negotiating with real estate interests, and the real estate industry in the city of New York has very deep pockets, and this way there's a lot of the subway system. It's 100 years old. There's a lot that needs to be rebuilt and or renovated. And so since the president likes to support winners, since he's a real estate guy and he's made a lot of money in New York, he's going to look at what they're doing in New York. And Congress is going to listen to him. And also the rest of the country continually is saying, what are they doing in New York? What are they doing in New York? So it's all connected, and that's why I've taken a subset of all infrastructure that could be worked on to rebuild the country. I've focused in on mass transportation. And the reason I've focused on mass transportation is because, one, I wanted to start off and point out how the president's interests and my interests could align with each other. And also what we're talking about is mass transportation is a subset of everything that could be done to rebuild the country. And to talk about other areas, it would be nice to talk about it, and perhaps in a future YouTube talk I will, but for now we're limited in time. And in terms of time allocation for this overall talk, I need to allocate a time budget on myself. Now let's talk about the other two pillars of Trump economics, and then I'll summarize and we'll conclude. The other two pillars of Trump economics, we spoke about it before. Not only does the president need to walk back and re-embrace Trans-Pacific Partnership, and I think it's really helpful if he's able to, once he embraces TPP, he gets South Korea to join us as well. And this way we'll have more leverage with the Chinese in improvement in trade and enhanced nuclear security in North Korea. And he has other work to do, the president. The North American Free Trade Agreement between Canada, Mexico, and the U.S. These are our largest trading partners. We need to look at whether or not we need to make some adjustments to it. It's a 25-year-old treaty, and in preparation of this talk, I watched Al Gore debate Ross Perot on Larry King, and but that was 25 years ago, and maybe it needs to be refreshed, and we need to revisit it. So that's another form of a multilateral free trade agreement. Also, the Obama administration was hoping to do a trade agreement with the European Union, and he never got around to that. And also, You could add England and Norway, which are not part of the EU. And I think there's safety in numbers and there's prosperity in numbers. And I also think that NAFTA and the European Union plus UK and NOR, United Kingdom and Norway, I think down the road, let's say Trump wins 2 terms, over the second term, he could add that to the United States' allies, trade partners. It's sort of an arsenal of sorts, and we could persuade the Chinese to make some compromises. What I'm thinking about in trade with China and overall the United States with other countries is no victors, no vanquished. So, in other words, everybody gets a certain degree of respect, but and at the same time, we want to expand the economy, energize the economy, and continue moving forward in the United States. So that covers trade with China and with the rest of the world, and tactically the things he needs to do. And so these are my suggestions to the president. The president is leaning on bilateral free trade understandings. He sent Secretary of Treasury Steve Mnuchin, Head of Commerce Wilbur Ross, and the Special U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer. Bright guys, but in card-playing parlance, they came to China with a bad hand. And the Chinese are stalling for time. And I think that we will get some compromise of China. If we want on a piece of paper where you could dot the I's and cross the T's, we can have a bilateral free trade agreement with China. But I think the more leverage we have, the more trade partners we have, we've worked out the kinks in our trade agreement, and then we walk into a room with China, we have more leverage to create a win-win situation with China, which is beneficial also to the United States. So the other point, the last point about Trump economics, which I don't agree with, I don't agree with tax reform and tax cuts. And I've had a problem with tax cuts for 38 years. I remember being 25 years old. Reagan was elected, and he was going to win. Jimmy Carter worked very hard at his job, but we had double-digit unemployment and double-digit inflation, and Reagan promised this magic elixir called supply-side economics. He was going to cut taxes 30% over an extended period of time. He was not going to cut expenses very much. He was going to ramp up military expenditures to engage Russia, which Soviet Union, which is run by the Russians, and he was going to balance the budget. And at 25 years old, that was 38 years ago, I knew that what Ronald Reagan was offering the American people, despite some tough economic years with a well-meaning Jimmy Carter, it was a fiscal train wreck. And here we are, 38 years later, we're still in the middle of what could be a fiscal train wreck. Look, the economy is going well, 3.9% unemployment, less than 2% inflation. At the end of the year, when we total up economic output of the country, $20 trillion. So we still have the world's biggest economy. So there are many things going well, but what really bothers me, there are half a dozen things I could talk about the budget and about tax cuts and budget deficits. But time prevents me from going into all the detail that I want. But let me tell you what really bothers me. What really bothers me is the budget. 7.5% of the budget is interest on the debt. Interest on the debt. It must be paid off before you pay Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and the military. And our military is huge. If you take Russia, the budget, the dollar amount of the military budget for Russia, China, France, and Germany, and 2 other leading nations, the United States military is bigger. So the problem is, before you pay $1 towards these 4 areas and what's left of the federal budget, you need to pay interest on the debt. That's 7.5% of the federal budget. And I find that disturbing. And also, through the research I performed in leading up to this talk, I can see that 5 or 6 years from now, the budget, 12 to 12.5%, will be interest on the debt. And to me, that's a fiscal train wreck. I knew that back in 1980. And I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I knew that, and I would like to believe what the Republicans are offering, but they've been wrong, wrong, wrong. We've never had surpluses, budget surpluses. There are other areas where they can make an argument about other economic indicators, and they will have a conversation, and their work could give them some ground. Uh, Look, I'm a Democrat, and this is a team effort. Everybody's to blame. The Democrats are to blame, and I think the American people are to blame because there's no connection between tax and spend. Nobody wants to pay taxes, but if a hurricane knocks your home down, you'd like a federal agency, FEMA, other agencies to come in and rebuild it 100 cents on the dollar. So nobody wants to pay taxes until you have a real problem. So that's why we need to have a grand bargain bipartisan across the country on the budget and the budget deficit. Believe me, if I went to a dinner party with my friends and I said, "Oh, I'm really worried about the deficit," some people would agree with me, other people would laugh, and then pretty soon we'd talk about where are we going out to dinner, or what's the next Broadway show we're going to see. Nobody would want to talk about that. Anyway, Trump has his tax cut, and he's promising a wide range of benefits from his tax cut. But I've been through that with Ronald Reagan, and there are things he did that I respect. And even though I didn't vote for Bush father and son, there are some things they did that I respect. And they're both Bush 41 and Bush 43. They're very likable people, even though I didn't vote for them. So I think that there are things that we need to do, and I think these tax cuts are a terrible mistake. All we're doing is giving money to prosperous corporations and wealthy individuals who are putting money in a Cayman Islands account. The profitable businesses, what they're doing a lot is they're buying back stock. And by buying back stock, they're appreciating the value of the stock. And what that means is if you're in the marketplace in Wall Street, that means your net worth is increasing. So right now, that's the only good I could see of the tax cuts. And I think it's a terrible mistake. And but the problem is us. We keep voting for candidates who promise to cut taxes and not cut the budget. Or we're not rebuilding the country. If we're going to run deficits, we should rebuild the country. Infrastructure rebuilding. And I'm willing, in terms of public administration, in terms of cost-benefit analyses, in terms of utilitarian comments, I'll sit down with Republicans. I'll sit down with Bernie Sanders, liberal Democrats. I'll sit down with everyone and I'll say, what can we do to pull together? Because ultimately, in this country, we are all in this together. Now that I've said just about everything I need to in Chapter 5, new questions, next steps. And that's the title of today's talk. Let me just give you some concluding thoughts. I think that the free trade agreements and the infrastructure rebuilding are inextricably linked. I think that multilateral free trade agreements expand the economy and will create more jobs in the United States. But if I'm wrong, there's even a greater benefit. We're providing political cover to our trade partners in Asia and who look upon China as this giant country in terms of population, economy, and military, as a little bit like the neighborhood bully. And by the United States backing them up and them backing us up, we're all in this together and we could more productively negotiate with China. And also, free trade agreements have a bad name because of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders running in the primaries ran against it. And then Hillary Clinton, unfortunately and belatedly, walked back and disowned her previous support of multilateral free trade agreements when she was Secretary of State. And I think that was a mistake for Hillary. I don't know if that cost her the election, but it was a mistake. And also, I think at the same time, if we're rebuilding the country, we can reach out to people who are chafed in Indiana, out of work coal miners in Kentucky, there are a lot of people throughout the country who are struggling, and we can reach out to them and we could say, um, we think free trade agreements is the best way to go, but if you disagree with us, at the same time, we're going to rebuild the country. We're putting people to work, and we're going to invest in people infrastructure with scholarships to trade schools, public 2 and 4 year colleges, and kids that study STEMS discipline and have majors that align with science, technology, engineering, and math. It's going to be a pipeline for jobs and rebuilding the country. So that about sums up everything I wanted to say today. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for hanging in there and listening to me. And if you have any comments, any kind of comments, good, bad, somewhere in the middle, I'm eager to hear what you have to say. Today is May 6th. We're in the year 2018, and it's a Sunday. And I'm speaking to you from my home in Forest Hills, New York. Forest Hills is in Queens County, which is an outer borough of the city of New York. This is episode 24. The overall subject matter today is civics, and the topic of today's conversation is new questions, next steps. So until next time, goodbye and good luck.